open at 6:02. Tonight we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Tonight we do have a member on leave, and Councillor Rosalind Harley has requested a leave of absence for tonight. So I would like to request a mover and seconder for a motion to approve the leave of absence. Thank you, Councillor Loden. Seconded, Councillor Fotakis. All those in favour? Declare the motion carried. Leave approved. We'll go straight to public question time. Welcome to members of the public gallery to the council meeting. This is an opportunity for you to come forward and make a statement. We do ask that you state your name, the suburb that you reside in and the item that you are speaking to, and we do ask that you speak for up to 3 minutes, and the CEO does have his timer, so there's no set order, it's just whoever wishes to come forward first. So I'll close public question time, but thank you very much for your comments and for attending. We will now go to applications for leave of absence. Have we got any applications, CEO? There are nil. Now we will go to the receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. And I think I'll just flag that next time we revise our meeting procedures, we might just do this straight after public question time. Seems a bit odd to have to take leave of absence requests and then to ask Sister Eileen to come back to the microphone. So patience for the evening, so we'll go to confirmation of minutes. We have a number of sets of minutes before us. We have the ordinary meeting of the 30th of April 2019. So I'm just noticing that in the agenda it has 3 sets of minutes. There are only 2 because we only had the one special council meeting. So we're actually looking at the ordinary meeting of the 30th of April 2019 and the special council meeting of the 21st of May 2019. So I'll just move those 2 sets of minutes. If I could please have a mover and seconder to adopt both of the minutes. Thank you. Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Fotakis. All those in favour? Thank you. The meeting minutes are carried. Announcements by the presiding member. I did want to talk a little bit about Beaufort Street tonight. It's something that has been attracting a lot of attention in the media about the state of health of Beaufort Street, and we have seen over the last few months a lot of independent businesses walk away from Beaufort Street, and more recently in the last sort of 48-hour period we have also seen a further 2 in 5 bar and in Clarence's, and it has been causing concern for both businesses on the street and also local residents. So we know that the issue of vacancies does then have a potential ripple effect on those existing businesses on the street, and it starts to feel that the vacancies may outnumber the businesses left standing. So the City of Vincent is engaging in some new strategies to try to assist this situation, and we know that the vacancies and the lack of diverse and unique mix of offerings on Beaufort Street is quite critical. So we're engaging in a vacancy project. It's something that we will be funding through our draft budget initiatives, but we do have some money on budget for this year, so we're keen to kick-start the tendering process to get that project happening. Today I met with Mayor Irwin from the City of Stirling, and he has indicated that this is a project that he thinks the City of Stirling would also like to come on board with and work together with the City of Vincent in partnership. We think that it will tackle the issue. We know that there are other things that we can do, like hold street activations, etc., but we really do need the bricks and mortar businesses there. We need to have that mix of retail, the independent businesses that make our town centres so unique, and give us that competitive edge over the shopping centres that not only do we have now, but are being constantly redeveloped. So we're talking with the City of Stirling about that. We're also continuing to support strongly the Beaufort Street Network, who have just finalised their latest action plan, and we are doing more in relation to infrastructure. Over the past 5 to 6 years, we have delivered the Mary Street Piazza, Lightbox Laneway, the Beaufort Street sign, significant artworks on the street. We've continued to fund events. They haven't been the full-scale one-day festival, and there's a lot of commentary around that and why one-day festivals don't necessarily deliver for local businesses, but we have continued to fund low-scale events through the Beaufort Street Network, and we intend to do more and to raise that up a notch. We are going to be delivering in September a creative lighting project for the street, so not street lights but actually uplighting the Beaufort Street art sign, and hopefully with the budget some trees etc. to make that really have a nice sense of lighting and ambience, and to really add to the vibrancy of the area. But all in all, on our draft budget, we have around $330 worth of funding initiatives to support Beaufort Street, either directly or through strategies like our new economic development strategy that we're developing. So we also have a very strong support local marketing campaign that will underpin all of this. And we'll continue to offer our first hour free in our public car parks, and there has been discussion amongst council about having a discussion about whether we've got the parking solutions right, and it is always important for us to revisit and assess at all times, so that's something that can also happen. Look, there's no easy answer for Beaufort Street. We've got incredibly tough economic conditions out there, even for our town centres that look really healthy. I know that it's tough for retail in particular, but we definitely have ideas, and we have the partnerships, and we have the passion to try to affect change on the strip, and we think that the vacancy project is a way to really tackle the critical issues at hand. And so it is great to see that that Stirling are prepared to come on board with us and tackle that together. So we'll keep everyone updated on those new projects as we go. Also just wanted to briefly mention, while we're talking about town centres, that this Friday night we launch the Leederville Village Square. The event's called Squaresville, and it's an opportunity for everyone to come and see the square in action. The City of Vincent, along with the Town Team Movement, will be running an exercise, a dotocracy exercise, where we ask people to place dots on their favourite activities and events that they'd like to see in the space, and there's some really great ideas that have already been put forward by Leederville Connect to make that space work by day, dusk and dark, and get a lot of different and inviting events happen there. So that's a really good example of what can happen when the city and the town team work together. And the other event to mention is that on the 15th of June we are looking to open North Perth Common, and we should have the artwork lit up by then, so we're hoping to do that and take that through to dark, so that we can really see what that artwork looks like at night time. So they're quite exciting events coming up as well. Declarations of interest, unless there are any late declarations, I understand from the CEO that we have nil.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The one declaration of interest received at the briefing session last week was for an item which has been now withdrawn by the applicant, which was item 9.1.
Yes, and just to note that there have been 3 items withdrawn from the agenda. So that's item 9.1, which was dealing with 147 to 149 Brisbane Street. 11.6, termination of sublease at a portion of Woodville Reserve, has been withdrawn, and 11.9, amendments to the city's policy register have been withdrawn. So yes, 3 items no longer being dealt with this evening. So I'll just go around the room and ask that, in addition to the items already mentioned by members of the public gallery, which were 11.3, 11.7 and 9.3, if council members wish to bring items forward for debate. Councillor Hallett.
11.1 and 12.1.
Councillor Castle.
11.10.
Councillor Murphy. Councillor Loden. Councillor Fotakis.
Sorry, Mayor. 11.11. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 10.1, thanks.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
9.2, please.
Okay. All right. I'll now go to the CEO to go through the items that will be moved en bloc. I'll give you a moment to go through that.
Sorry, Mayor. Can you retract 11.1? It was 11.11 that I meant.
Oh, okay, sure. So no 11.1.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll read out the agenda item numbers for the items to be moved en bloc, which are item 10.2, item 11.1, item 11.2, item 11.4, item 11.5, item 11.8, item 12.2.
Can I please have a mover and seconder for the en bloc items? Moved Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? I declare the en bloc items carried. So in terms of the order that Council will now debate the items, we go to the items first raised by members of the public gallery. So the first item that was raised this evening was item 11.3, which is the land exchange and reclassification of land, amendment number 4 to local planning scheme number 2, portion of lot 75 Brentham Street of Brentham Street Reserve for portion lot 100, brackets number 20, and lot 37, brackets number 26, Brentham Street, Arundel Catholic Primary School, consideration of submissions and conditional contract of sale. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item, please? Moved Councillor Loden. Seconded Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There has been a bit of discussion about this, and in between the briefing and the council meeting, there's also been some discussions between the various parties involved, and I just wanted to congratulate administration on managing to get that done in a week. That was impressive. I feel I'm quite comfortable with the information provided and the decision that's proposed here. I did want to ask a question, further clarification around the paving and walkway. We were provided some advice in the briefing notes that there is potential for a pathway extension to occur, and I was just wondering if we could get a little bit more detail on that, if it is available.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I'm afraid I can't give you any more detail at this meeting. What I can say is that we have in next year's budget, which is yet to be approved obviously in the draft budget, some money for connecting paths in this reserve. We are waiting for the land swap to find out whether it goes ahead before deciding on the final location of those paths. Obviously, I've listened to the discussion tonight, and I'm aware of some of the discussions with the other landowners, so we'll be mindful of that when we choose the exact location of those paths to make sure it does connect the right facilities.
Thank you. So I guess obviously providing that connection for the Rosewood residents is of interest and is, I guess, something that I'm concerned about, and I hazard to guess other councillors are concerned about as well. And I have every confidence that the administration will work to find an appropriate solution to that. But otherwise, I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to support this. It's been a long and well-considered negotiation, and I think this week's arrival with the cooperation document behind stakeholders, Sister of Mercy and Rosewood, and the meetings that have taken place, I think just adds certainly to my confidence that every effort to seek opinions and involvement of people that are going to be most greatly impacted by this have been sought, so I'm very happy to support that.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Konchevsky.
Oh, look, I just wanted to, at the briefing last week, I raised some questions regarding the 5 mature trees that are in the land area, and in terms of options that could be in place around, in terms of options that would be in place around retaining them. I do note that there is both sewer line and drainage line running through that section of the land reserve, and just was wondering if I could just get, putting the Director of Infrastructure and Environment on the spot, the sort of requirements or consultation that would be required around if those were to be rerouted. I guess from the way that I look at it, I feel that there is probably a lower risk of those trees being taken down for built form because they are sitting on top of the sewer and drainage line. But I guess at this late juncture, I am still wondering about the appropriateness of including a caveat around the retention of at least one of those mature trees that was quite a nice specimen on that site.
Yeah, through you, Nicole. It's difficult to give a precise answer. What I will say is unusual to remove infrastructure of this type and that size. It would be quite a difficult thing to achieve, and in my experience, I would guess it's unlikely that that would happen. So if that answers your question.
Okay, I don't particularly like the idea of putting restrictions onto a land sale that at this late point, so I'll leave it on the basis that I think that those trees provide a great benefit, and I'm sure that the school will continue to enjoy them, and that I think it's probably unlikely that built form will be going over the top of those lines anytime soon.
Councillors, Councillor Doppelberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question through you to the Acting Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment. Got it. Excellent. Thank you. There was a question.
I don't think he's acting.
It is until we formalise the structure. They're all acting.
No, he is actually already the Director of...
Excellent. That makes...
don't worry, Don't worry, Director.
On your attention to the role.
Safe.
Thank you.
Please do not worry.
Okay, sorry, I appreciate that, thank you. So through you to the Director of all of that. There was a question asked in relation to the location of, at the briefing in relation to the location of the playground, and we got information back in regards to there being 20 millimetre encroachment of a portion of the playground, and it's unlikely that the playground, that the old part of the playground will survive the land exchange. The soft fall that sits underneath it obviously, well, if nothing else, will look odd if it has a fence placed through the middle of it with the playground removed. Can we just get an idea of what happens with that and who's responsible financially for the either reinstatement of grass or otherwise? Is it just something that we put a fence up in the middle and then remove the soft fall on each side and pay our own way? Is that intended to be handed over to the city free of any encumbrance? What's the actual plan for that portion of the land?
Through you, Nicole, I don't know the specifics of what will actually happen about the removal of the softfall. Obviously, some of the land's being handed back to the city or handed to the city vacant with structures removed, but that specific location, I couldn't give you a direct answer.
And perhaps through you, Madam Mayor, to the CEO, just an explanation of what the process is from here for if this is approved as recommended. What's the actual process from here for the city and for the Sisters of Mercy?
We're redirecting your question to the Manager of Governance, if that's okay, Councillor Doppelberg.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So we haven't worked out the specifics yet, but we'd engage with the school and figure out that playground was actually installed by the school initially, so they would look at whether they're removing it, remove the soft fall, and then look at an outcome that suits the city and the community need as well. So we wouldn't just put the fence down in the middle of the soft fall, and this process will probably take 6 to 12, maybe 6 to 18 months before we actually exchange the lands, because we have to go through the scheme amendment process. So during that process, we'll consult on whether we remove the whole playground or a portion and what would go in that area.
Thank you. Just general comment. I will support the officer recommendation, but I do think there are some good lessons here for the city in particular. I think the fact that we ended up consulting on a significant land swap with adjacent neighbours not being informed other than through the general consultation process is a pretty poor oversight on our behalf. I think that we probably should have done some door knocking before the matter even came to council, but certainly as part of the consultation process. I accept Sister Arlene Duffy's comments about there being significant portion of land that people wouldn't even know belongs to the Sisters of Mercy. Likewise, there's a significant portion of City of Vincent owned land that was leased for $1 and is fenced by the primary school that people wouldn't actually know belongs to the city. So I think there's a lot of people not knowing what goes on with the land around here, and that odd walkway that exists between Rosewood and the school. I think the outcome is certainly a positive outcome for the school. I think that the issues of land value, I will look forward to an explanation of how those valuations were realised, and understand about the development potential of the land. But I think that ultimately, as I say, the officer recommendation is supportable, and I'm glad that whilst at the 11th hour that meeting between what is potentially the most impacted parties was forthcoming. But I do think that in itself goes some way to, unfortunately, giving rise to some of the comments that came during the consultation, that it was perhaps presented as a fait accompli or a deal done between organisations, as opposed to exactly how it did happen, in my view, which is a logical formalisation of some of the existing arrangements, and a future arrangement that's to the benefit of all parties.
Councillors? I will just ask a question to the Manager of Governance, because there's been a lot of commentary about the consultation that occurred, and it does say in the report that leaflets were distributed to the properties abutting the land exchange area on the 13th of March 2019. So I'm just wanting to ask, in terms of Rosewood's awareness, would they have received a leaflet, or what, as an abutting neighbour?
Those leaflets were distributed after we met with Rosewood on site and discussed with them. So Rosewood was aware prior to then, and obviously was engaged since that point. But initially, because we're not required to actually consult, because it's exempt, so we didn't initially distribute leaflets. We just put public notices up and put it on the website and on our social media platforms.
Okay, yes. I think in retrospect it would have been good to send letters to the adjoining neighbours, but the fact of the matter is that once that was raised, I think that the response by the city's administration has been very good, and obviously the meeting yesterday went very well, where we have now an amicable agreement between neighbours, and a cooperative agreement that is something that we don't see all too often in these sorts of matters, and I think that's commendable that we got to that point, and it really sets a really good positive tone for future relationships between the two neighbours. And I do love the mention of the intergenerational interaction between those two sites, because there is some great potential there. Look, it has been said, but it has been a very long-standing issue to resolve the use of the land around Brentham Street Reserve and Arranmore Primary School. I think that this has been done in a fair and transparent way. Obviously we're not obligated to consult, but I think that's not something the City of Vincent would do anyway, because we know that this is in the public interest, and we know that it's something that the public would want to know about. Where we've landed, I think, is a much better outcome. It's clearer, it's safer, it really clarifies for the public the ownership of the land, and I think that it sort of signals that the City of Vincent is not wanting to have these sort of strange peppercorn arrangements that then have built form on them, and that we need to really say, clearly where private land exists and where public land exists, and to make that as accessible as possible. So the access from Brentham Street will be much clearer, much more legible. Councillor Castle, I know you love that word. And people will be able to actually see visually from the street that green space is accessible. So it does create better access from that perspective. So, look, I do think that it has taken some time, and the negotiations were ongoing, and I think it's really good to actually finally get some clarification on this one, and to be very clear and transparent about where those boundaries are and how best to access that public land for our community. Are there any further comments? Yes, Councillor Toppelberg.
So just a question. Goes further, probably to the Director of Development Services or Planning and Place. Have I got it right? Big go. Further to Councillor Gontaszewski's queries earlier, the option or opportunity to place those trees on the trees of significance register, which would then mean a planning application would be required to touch the trees, irrespective of whether there was any built form planned. Is that something, is the city limited by the ownership of the land as to if and when it could place those trees on the register? So could it be done now, next week, next month, next decade?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the city does have a policy that guides essentially the process around including trees, and the owner is a large part of that process currently under the policy. There's nothing stopping council though from, for, if there are other reasons, if there are reasons that the policy should be set aside, the procedures set out in that policy should be set aside, and the trees should be included, then there's nothing stopping council from making that decision. One of the major requirements of the policy is an arborist assessment of the trees to ensure that they're in good health and that they are of value for retention. So that's one piece of advice I can give you now, along with obviously consultation with the owner. So, but that is a piece of work that would need to be undertaken to have that arborist report undertaken. That's something that could happen between now and the scheme amendment being finalised, so there is an opportunity for that to occur.
Just, sorry, Madam Mayor, a further question to the Manager of Governance, Property and Contracts. Is that something that perhaps should be added as even a reservation of the right to the reservation of our right to place the trees on the trees of significance register as part of the decision tonight, or is that something that you believe could be dealt with at a later stage if that was of interest? I'm not suggesting placing them on the register currently, but to at least explicitly reserve that right so that if it does arise during the negotiation process, it has a council decision attached to it if that was the will of council?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't think we necessarily have to resolve that tonight, because my understanding of the policy for significant trees is council can resolve at any time to add them to the register once the arborist has undertaken the assessment. So we could, when we report back on the scheme amendment, it could be considered at that stage, and that gives us some time to obviously engage an arborist and have a look at whether the trees satisfy the criteria.
Would that process require an amendment, or are we happy that that can just be done?
Through you, Mayor Cole, what I'd suggest is the next time we engage an arborist for the city work, that we just add an initial assessment of those trees to that list of work, and we do that on a very regular basis for our parks and other trees. So I think we can undertake to council that within the next 3 months we'll have an initial assessment from an arborist across those trees of interest to council members.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the item. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. The next item raised was 11.7, which is public open space proposal for Sydney and Haynes Street site, North Perth. Can I have a mover and seconder? Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you. So before us tonight, we've got a proposal for the sale of city land in North Perth to Kids Galore Party Limited. Kids Galore are long-term tenants of a portion of this land holding, and we've got North Perth Playgroup and the Department of Health who are also tenants on the site, with leases expiring in December 2020 or in June the following year. There's a caveat over part of the land holding that requires the land to be set aside for public recreation. And we also have a public open space strategy and a gap analysis that has looked at the provision of public open space in the adjacent areas and identified that there is a lack of access to local open space in North Perth, and also identified a number of actions for the city to undertake around improving access to the land that is currently held by the city and is not able to be accessed by the public for the purpose of recreation, and this is via a number of strategies where we have potential lease holdings or built form on areas that could be used for public open space. I think what, and I can appreciate what Kids Galore are seeking here in relation to their proposal is certainty. They are a business and they run a commercial childcare operation, and they want to be able to make plans for their future. However, I also believe that the city has an obligation to undertake our planning for open space across the city in a considered and strategic fashion, and that's why we have started with doing a rigorous analysis of open space provision that was undertaken through the public open space strategy. So I can appreciate that for this site, where we currently have, it's not a park, it's built form, it's just, basically boundary to boundary, all fences, number of different organisations, all undertaking purposes that have community merit but still are not available to the public for recreation. As per the Trust, and also as per our aims for increasing the provision of open space in North Perth. So I think that what Kids Galore are looking for is certainty. I can appreciate that they have undertaken an analysis of what could be done with the site and have put forward a proposal. I believe that recommendation 2 within this motion is around the city undertaking a development plan for the site that would be able to consider the size of land holding that is required in for public open space in the area, and also look at the type of amenities that could be provided. Undertaking that planning is completely in line with the implementation of our public open space strategy. And we have before us in the coming financial year a number of other plans for open space around, pending budget decisions, of course, but around Woodville Reserve, and also undertaking planning for Robertson Park potentially. We're undertaking planning for Leederville Oval, and we've also got a plan for Banks Reserve that we need to commence implementation of. All of these things cost money, and so I do believe I can understand that that the city, through its development planning, through its master planning, can look at options across the city for where we can increase access to open space, and there may be the potential in certain areas for city-owned land holdings to be repurposed or to be sold to finance the purchase or the upgrade of public land in other areas. However, when we were doing our analysis of the public open space strategy, and we had a workshop to look at the data collection that had been undertaken and that informed the development of this strategy, it was pretty clear that within the area that of Sydney Street and Haynes Street in North Perth, that those surrounding streets, they didn't have the same level of access to local open space as was available in other areas of Vincent. And it was, when we looked at, because the data collection that we did, you were able to sort of see if you increased access to open space here, what would that do to some of our catchment mapping. This is a prime site to actually deliver some open space to the community. The proposal put forward by Kids Galore does, and there it is, it does look at options for how open space could be reclaimed by the city, and we have certainly demonstrated that we can undertake projects like the Hyde Street Reserve project, by which we undertook roads to park. And I think that that's also, part of our ability to do that across the board. However, in this instance, given that there is a caveat over the land, the question is not necessarily whether that caveat could be lifted. I think the question is whether that caveat in this instance should be lifted, and I'm unable to form the view on the basis of the evidence that we have around public open space provision that in this instance and at this time, prior to the commencement of a development plan, and that work undertaken by the city, that we should commence a process to lift that caveat. I actually have an amendment on the table on the blue, and I think this is essentially to rather than the amendment is to.
Councillor Gonchaszewski, just because the seconder hasn't spoken, I just might say whether the seconder wishes to proceed straight to the amendment or whether you wish to speak to the motion first. You wish to proceed to the amendment?
Yeah.
Okay.
The amendment is to address the proposal directly at this time and to decline the land purchase proposal for the portion of Sydney Street and Hyde Street, including Lot 9, and advise Kids Galore that essentially as the land is encumbered by a deed of trust and the proposal as presented is a key component, that land is a key component of the proposal presented, that that the city is declining the proposal, so that because we don't support varying the deed of trust, because the land is considered to be required for public recreation, and because we couldn't, or that the council is not of a view to build the case that it would be impossible, impractical or expedient, which is the wording from the Charitable Trusts Act of 1962, to for the land to remain subject to the trust. So yes, that's the amendment. I think that it's probably a bit more blunt, but I think ultimately it's important that we are clear in what is being considered as part of this proposal. It's not to prejudice or to form a view as to what may come through the preparation of a development plan for the site. However, I think it's we need to be clear as to whether council is of the view to accept the proposal and consider lifting the deed, or to decline the proposal and leave the deed in place.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'm happy to support the amendment for the same reasons that Councillor Gonchaszewski's outlined. I think that based on the legal advice and the evidence that we have today, in particular in relation to our public open space strategy and that gap analysis, I'm not convinced that we would be successful in lifting the caveat, but as Councillor Gonchaszewski said, more importantly that we should be endeavouring to, because I think it's been quite clear from those processes that we've been through in that analysis that this is an area that is lacking in public open space, and given that there is a requirement for certainty for Kids Galore, I don't believe that it's appropriate to proceed on a maybe case, that we might consider these things and that perhaps we need to be clear about our intentions. That may not rule out further conversations with Kids Galore in relation to some of the other portions of that land, but certainly in relation to Lot 9, I don't believe that the city should be pursuing a removal of the caveat. So I'm happy to support the amendment as written, and probably don't need to speak on that.
Okay, we're dealing with the amendment. Councillor Loden.
I just wanted to clarify, is the amendment now part of the substantive, or are we just dealing with the amendment now?
We're dealing with the amendment. Comments in relation to the amendment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Bingo. Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of comments. I think, well, I have no argument with the with the desire to give clarity to Kids Galore. I think that, again, from my reading of my own interactions, that the Kids Galore met with, at varying times, the Mayor, CEO, former CEO, the former Director of Corporate Services, the Deputy Mayor, myself, and a group of councillors at times, and I think that they've had formal advice in one form or another, dating back to December 2016. So the fact that we are 2 years and 5 months down the track, where if the amendment passes as suggested, which effectively says the deed of trust doesn't allow us to do it, therefore we won't do it, I think that it's probably, there's a fairness principle that may apply in terms of how long it's taken us to get to this point, but that's, we are where we are. I think that I understand the intent of the amendment, and I appreciate that if elected members are of the view that they don't wish to vary the deed of trust, this is in fact a far better way of expressing it, because it makes it clear and makes it clear as to why. And so, yeah, for that reason, I'm glad that the amendment was put forth. I think that the intent of the deed of trust and the opportunity to be able to create a benefit for the community broadly, which includes public open space and the continued provision of an essential service, whether it be for commercial profit or otherwise, I think is an achievable solution. I don't know whether, for me personally, that depends on the nature of that planning and that outcome and the ability to fund it as a city. And for me, I can't say absolutely that I think that the deed of trust should stay in place. So I won't support the amendment as it stands, nor the officer recommendation as it is, but I do appreciate and think that it's important that it be brought as a simple black and white question that it is, which is whether we do or don't support it. So I appreciate it coming forward in this way.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the amendment. I think it removes all the doubt. Legal advice gives us the indication that there won't be an ability to vary the deed of trust, but whether there is a variation or not, it's a long-held saying that was given to me many years ago about development is just because you can doesn't mean you should, and in this instance I don't believe we should, so I will be supporting the amendment.
Councillors? Councillor Murphy?
Look, I support the notion that we probably, well, we're certainly, it's unlikely that that we should honour the deed, so I agree with that. I'm just unsure in terms of, does that actually mean that there is no workable solution with kids galore if we keep lot 9 intact? Is that it's completely dead if the deed is in place? There's in terms of there's no workaround for kids galore. Do we know?
I might go to the Director for Community and Business just to talk through the amendment and the implications for Lot 9 versus the rest of the site.
Through you, Mayor Cole, what this amendment would mean is that fundamentally the proposal that's been put forward by Kids Galore cannot proceed because it does include development and purchase of a portion of lot number 9. The intent of the original recommendation, and indeed even with the amendment, is to still proceed with a development plan. So that requires the city to look at the intention of those remaining lots for the purposes of public open space, but also requires us enables us to look at lot layout and whether any of that land is deemed suitable for a purpose other than public open space. So I guess it does remove lot 9 as a potential development site for Kids Galore as their proposal. It doesn't necessarily restrict further conversations with them about the remainder of the site. However, obviously the outcomes of the public open space strategy and the intention behind Council's decision making around lot number 9 obviously identifies the importance of all 3 of these lots to perform the public recreation and the public open space function, and therefore that would be the main driving factor for the development plan.
Great, thank you.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? Look, I'll speak in favour of the amendment. It is, I'm sure, the news that Kids Galore was not hoping to hear, but we have had a strong message from Kids Galore that they did want certainty about the future on this site, and I do think that this delivers much needed certainty. And where councillors have actually come to a view about the legal advice that we've received and come to a view about the evidence base of our public open space about land shortages in this area and feel that they are ready to make this decision, then I think that the fair and transparent thing to do is to actually say to Kids Galore, we have the information before us that we need to make this decision. And I do understand that Kids Galore has been a long-standing and excellent tenant. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and that they do provide a really high-quality service to a largely local families, and that makes a decision difficult, and I do acknowledge that, and I think that is hard. It's not an easy decision to make, but I think that when we are taking on our responsibilities as council members, we actually need to look at public interest overall. And I do think that while there is there's a good benefit to the community in having childcare in the locality, the public interest in terms of this actual public open space for me does outweigh that. Kids Galore has been a great tenant of the City of Vincent. They are a tenant. At no point has this council ever said that we would sell the land to Kids Galore. That's not something that has ever been put forward as an option by me or by this council. So I don't think that I think that it has taken us too long to be clear about this. And I do want to make the point that council did not have that legal advice until the last 6 months, and I think that it would have been much more efficient if that could have been provided to council sooner, because upon reading that advice I found that it was really very clear in terms of the actual terms of whether we could lift that deed of trust, and that the bar is incredibly high. The bar is involves going to the Supreme Court, going to the Attorney General and arguing that the land, it is impossible, impractical or inexpedient for the land to remain subject to the trust. And I just cannot see how we could argue in the public interest that that is the case. I just don't see that it is possible. In terms of sale of land as a local government, it is also incumbent upon us to follow certain procedures that are a much higher bar than if we were to be a private entity selling land. So there's also that consideration. And I think that a development plan is the right tool. It's the tool that we have, either a master planning exercise or a development plan. These are the tools that we have set ourselves through our open space strategy when we make decisions about our open space. And it is incumbent upon us to follow that process and to go out to our community and to have that direct communication and consultation with our community about this space, the facility needs, the opportunities, the different opportunities that this space represents, depending on the size of the land. It is a very unique parcel of land in the City of Vincent. We are an inner city community. This is a north-facing, sizable lot, a lot that we would struggle to replicate and purchase in another part of the city. It is a very unique opportunity. I do think that we do need to provide transitional time to Kids Galore. I think that that is the fair thing to do. I don't feel in any rush to push this development plan through in the next 6 to 12 months. I think that we really do need to consider the fact that Kids Galore does have people using their service and has been asking us for a time frame in which to transition. So I'm certainly not of a mind to rush a development plan and to move Kids Galore off the site quickly. I think the original time frame set out in the report to the briefing was reasonable, and I think it also reflects time that we need to consult with the community and also to look at the pacing of our master planning exercises that we are running. We can go back. We've got the Banks Reserve master plan. We're currently master planning at Leederville Oval. Next year we already have a master planning exercise scheduled for both Woodville Reserve and for Robertson Park. So I think we can still give transitional time to Kids Galore. As the Director of Community and Business has said, this is dealing specifically with Lot 9. It doesn't mean that when we go through the development planning process that there can't be submissions from Kids Galore or other people about how that land may or may not be utilised, whether it's all recreational, whether there's submissions that come forward on purchase of land, that still remains open and can be considered by council. But just also based on the age of the building that is on this site, it is ageing. It's not that we would be looking to demolish a building that's brand new and in great condition. It's an ageing building, and I think that regardless of the outcome, I understand Kids Galore would be looking to redevelop and renew the existing infrastructure. So I do want to acknowledge that this is not the outcome that Kids Galore were hoping for, but I do think that it is the best outcome in terms of the public interest overall and in terms of the priority that we have provided in the public space area and the need that we must act in order to have good public space for our inner city growing community, and where opportunities for land like this is incredibly rare. So I support the amendment. Are there any further comments on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Toppelberg voting against. And we're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments on the substantive motion? No? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? I declare it carried with Councillor Toppelberg voting against. I query whether we have to give reasons for amending as opposed to an alternative motion, but if you're seeking a reason, I would suggest that it's to clarify, to give greater clarity to Council's decision making around Lot 9 and the deed of trust. Yep. Okay, thank you. The next item raised by a member of the public gallery was item 9.3, which is review of policy number 3.8.12, mobile food vendor. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Councillor Hallett. Seconded Councillor Fotakis.
I'm happy to support it. The purpose of it is to advertise and seek public comment. We've heard some views from the public gallery, and certainly I share some of the concerns around mobile food vans in some places, but I think that this is an opportunity to hear more from the public about that.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to support it as well, like Councillor Hallett. It is a policy that's actually going out for community comment, so I look forward to receiving those comments from the community. I did have a couple of queries to the officers with regards to the issue of the heritage nature of the park and restrictions on use of the park. Looking at the food truck usage and what the implications would be on other non-heritage related uses of the park, like the playground area, weddings, events that are held there, like a Hyde Park fair, whether that opens up any implications, or really what the officers' comments are regarding that heritage usage.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. So the heritage listing for Hyde Park states that the significance of the place is as a location for passive recreation, social interaction, and as a venue for fairs, festivals, and public and private ceremonies, and that the place is important for its collection of mature trees and landscaping. The mobile food vendors policy is consistent with this heritage listing, as it ensures that only a small number of mobile food vendors operate in the park, and that they operate in a specific location that ensures that they don't disturb the enjoyment of those significant aspects of the park. So the policy is not inconsistent with the heritage listing. The new playgrounds that exist in the park aren't inconsistent with that heritage listing, and nor are the festivals and other events that occur. So I note the comment. I've noted the comment that the city's been contacted and hasn't got back to the resident about that query. So I'll make sure that we get back to the resident on that query tomorrow. The planning team does, because we have looked at that issue, and it's very clear that there's no need for approval, and the policy and those food trucks are consistent with the heritage listing.
Thank you.
Councillors, comments? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I'll just propose an amendment to clause 1 so that we've got a replacement page which, or the proposed amendment, sorry, to clause 1.5, which relates to the sound emission. So amenity and appearance. So I'll seek to amend clause 1.5, which would, so it currently reads, food vendors must consider measures to reduce sound emitted by mechanical devices and or activities associated with mobile food vendor operations to mitigate potential impacts on amenity of park users. And I will propose to amend that to say food vendors must ensure sound emitted by mechanical devices and or activities associated with mobile food vendor operations do not impact on the amenity of park users.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded, Councillor Hallett.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the simple test of this is how is that proved, and I think complying with legislation in relation to noise or otherwise would be the test. But I think we require things of businesses in all sorts of environments, and to me, the idea that someone would be able to be in a park with and have an argument about whether or not a loud generator is causing impact upon people's use of the park, I think it should be clearly covered in the policy. And if it's an easily solvable problem, and usually it's just solvable by having a better quality generator that doesn't emit any sound, because you can buy them that are silent. So if that's a limitation on someone being able to operate, then that's something that they need to consider, but not something that the community should have to deal with while they deal with that issue.
Do you wish to comment, Manager of Compliance?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'll let Prue just provide a brief comment.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, the clause 5.11 of the policy already has that provision to assess against the assigned levels of the environmental protection noise regulations if that amenity is something that we want to measure against.
The coordinator get a promotion when you come to council meetings, and the coordinator is referring to is 5.11. It talks about generator noise must also comply with the assigned levels in the environmental protection noise regs. Should justified complaints be received regarding amplified music from a mobile food vehicle, the city reserves the right to prohibit the emission of music at the site. Okay, so that's generator. I've just covered generator and music, but that clause deals with assigned levels under the noise regs. Councillor Hallett.
I'm supportive of stronger wording, but I'm just wondering if you also have any comment, Coordinator, about the broadness of mechanical devices and going beyond just music and generators that are covered in the other clause.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The broadness of that term is to capture types of, including exhaust extraction, potentially if they are cooking in the van. It would not limit us. The wording of 5.11 would not limit us to assessing different mechanical equipment against the regulations if that was necessary.
Councillor Hallett.
I mean, in that case, I'm supportive of the amendment. I'm curious to what other people would suggest, but considering measures to reduce the sound associated with all these activities, I think, is not perhaps as strong as I would like.
Councillors, any comments on the amendment?
Can we get the wording up on the screen? I'm sorry. Is it?
Yeah, so it would say must ensure that, so the words consider measures to reduce would be deleted, and say must ensure that, and then continue as per the clause, sound emitted by mechanical devices and or activities associated with the mobile food vendor operations, and then delete to mitigate potential and impacts, and put does not impact on amenity of park users. So it's the requirement becomes must ensure that it does not impact.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we're just pulling up that clause 1.5 in the policy to amend.
So the wording would now read, so delete the words consider measures to reduce and replace it with must ensure that. I know you're typing on another screen, but you've got a lot of words to get in between. Consider measures to reduce would be deleted and replaced with the words must ensure that. And then part 2 is delete the words to mitigate potential impacts and replace with the words does not impact. Yeah, and just at the beginning of that, delete the word must, so just ensure that, because must is at the end of the opening to the clause 1 at the top. So line 2 replace with ensure that. Yeah, and delete that word must there. It's already at the beginning, at the opening to the clause. Yep. Delete the words to mitigate potential impacts, plural, which is in the clause as it currently reads. So, to mitigate potential impacts, and replace with does not impact. That's right, thank you. So just so that the clause would read, amenity and appearance, mobile food vendors must, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, ensure that sound emitted by mechanical devices and or activities associated with mobile food vendor operations does not impact on amenity of park users.
Is it possible to have it written out in full so that we can actually have the actual wording in front of us as opposed to having to read between the two? Thank you.
While that's happening, can I ask a question?
Of course you can, Councillor Castle.
Berg. At the end of that clause, this does not impact on the amenity of park users. Is it worth considering a slightly broader category of people, given the comments we heard today were actually from surrounding neighbours?
I'll speak to the amendment once it's... I've spoken to the amendment, haven't I? So, no.
There's no right of reply on an amendment, just a reminder. So Councillor Hallett had spoken as the seconder, and so, yes, we're just taking any comments from other council members. Okay, we have the form of words, pretty much. Councillors, any comments on the amendment? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, look, I just think it's too restrictive. I think, we may as well just kill it. I don't support the amendment. I think, there needs to be some flexibility there. And it is going out to consultation too. So it'd be interesting to see what actually comes back from the public as to their views, but I think that seems too restrictive to me.
Councillors? Councillor Gonchevsky?
So just to confirm via the coordinator, if possible, that essentially the method of ensuring that sound emitted by mechanical devices or activities associated with mobile vendor operations isn't impacting on amenity, how would we both record, what would be the basis of complaints and how would we assess the merit of complaints? And would it simply be around the regulations, the noise regulations, or would the city, on the basis of this, be able to take action without considering those? Would this go beyond that?
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Cole, it would primarily be through the regulations. That would be our main tool to quantify this impact or this provision of the court's policy.
Councillors? Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yeah, I support the amendment. I don't think it's actually imposing any further restrictions on what is already required under the regulations, but I think it does make our intention clear and further outlines that there needs to be a balance of amenity between the provision of these food vendors and people using the park.
Councillors, just through to the coordinator, how many complaints has the city received about the operation of food trucks in the city of Vincent since the food trucks have been operating.
Yes. We've received 4 complaints.
And have they been from more than one complainant?
No, that's been from one person.
I don't support the amendment. It is too restrictive. I think that it is actually making it really difficult for food trucks to operate. Food trucks are largely dependent on generators. I agree with Councillor Murphy. This is effectively trying to kill food trucks' vendor policy by 1,000 cuts. And I think it's just too prescriptive, and I think that it could be used by complainants to argue that their amenity has been affected and to give further cause for complaint where we really haven't had complaints from the community, so I don't feel it's warranted, and it should go out as is, and that we should invite feedback from our community first about how food vendors, mobile food trucks are operating, because I think that complaints from one person is not enough feedback to make this sort of amendment to the policy, so I strongly disagree with the amendment. Any further comments?
No, just point of clarification, there was no comment from me as the mover of the amendment that it had anything to do with complaints from the community?
With respect, Councillor, I asked a question and I sought the information and it was provided. It's not a comment on your reason for putting it forward. It's reflecting my own views and comments. Thank you. We're back to the I put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Declare the amendment lost. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare the motion adopted. Thank you. They were the 3 items that were raised by members from the public gallery this evening, so we'll now move through the agenda sequentially for the remaining items. So the next item is 9.2, which is number 4 to 10 Cal Street and number 199 to 241 Fitzgerald Street, West Perth, Local Development Plan. Moved by Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Loden.
Sorry, if you could just bear with me in relation... I do have a question and I just need to get to the document. Through you to the Director of Development Services, just in relation to the... And if I've missed this in all the bits that are amending the actual LDP, forgive me. This is just in relation to the 3B, the table 3B, in relation to the Fitzgerald Street edge and the setbacks. There's a little asterisk there and it says, where an auditorium is proposed along the Fitzgerald Street edge, the minimum setback requirements as per the ballroom edge are permissible. And given that there's no difference, according to this, in the setbacks between the first and the third stories, but on the ballroom or the Fitzgerald Street edge, but there is a difference in the setbacks above, and I just wondered what the rationale behind that was, and indeed what the rationale behind the difference in the Fitzgerald Street and ballroom edge is, because they're all the same frontage, they're just different sections of the same frontage. The ballroom edge and the Fitzgerald Street edge both front Fitzgerald Street but have different setback requirements, and my understanding from that table would appear that that may be in relation to not the auditorium, something else that's on the ground floor. Anyway, I would just appreciate some clarification there, given that the setbacks are different along the same frontage.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. We're talking about 3E, is that correct? Sorry, I'm flicking between 2 documents now. 3B.
would be useful. Page 161, which was the link that I got taken to when I clicked attachment 6 local development plan.
Mm-hmm.
Section 3 relates to setbacks, and I'm not sure if section relating to it's the setbacks are just going to be as per the section in relation to the auditorium along the Fitzgerald Street edge is going to, if that statement is going to be retained with all the amendments that are proposed. I was just wondering what the rationale between different segments were, or whether that is no longer applicable under the amendments to the setbacks that are proposed in the recommendation.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. I was trying to find that too, because my understanding was it was replaced, and it is, if you look at recommendation 2.6, so it's all of it is replaced with the R codes. Oh no, sorry. It isn't replaced. No, that's correct. So the ballroom edge, so if a ballroom is proposed, an auditorium is proposed, it is as per the ballroom setbacks, so the upper floor setbacks are reduced. Now the rationale for that is because the facade treatment of the ballroom will be, it'll be double floor, and so that will allow them to be closer to the street with a different facade treatment than a typical residential development. So the apartments would have to have a greater setback, but in this case the ballroom wouldn't. So that's the rationale for that setback. So it's not being replaced.
Okay, just bear with me, I'm so sorry, but the rationale, so the ballroom or the auditorium, my understanding is that it would be in all likelihood, but no promises because the LDP is silent on any of this detail, but it is going to be probably at ground level. And so the intention about having the reduced setbacks at the ballroom from stories 4 to 6, 1.5 metres compared to 3 metres, and above 6 stories of 4.5 metres compared to 6 metres is to have that section of the building is just presenting differently, so that the upper stories are pushed forward to create a different, I don't know, look and feel to that section of the building. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the ground floor will look very different too, because it's a ballroom and it'll have a double height. It'll be 2 stories in itself, so the upper floors will also look different to match that. So that's the rationale for it. And that's the basis that the applicant has proposed, that reduced setback to Fitzgerald Street.
And in that instance that a auditorium is proposed along the Fitzgerald Street edge, do you think that wording has enough clarity? Like, is it intended that where the reduced setbacks, because I think the thing is that there's nil setbacks that are accepted from floors 1 to 3, regardless of whether it's the ballroom or Fitzgerald Street. What we're talking about is changes in setbacks from 4 stories and above. But I just wanted to clarify that, is the intention that where an auditorium is proposed along the Fitzgerald Street edge, the minimum setbacks requirements as per the ballroom edge are permissible to the extent that that auditorium is in play, or is it for the entire Fitzgerald Street edge?
Through you, Mayor, yes, through you, Mayor Cole, it's for the extent of the ballroom. I think that's clear in my reading of it. I just point out that under the built form policy currently, the setback is nil for all floors. So the applicant is trying to create some articulation along that frontage, and they've deliberately explained how they're going to do that. So the ballroom would have a lesser setback at upper floors to the remainder of the development. So that's the basis for it. So I think it's clear that it will only apply to the extent of the ballroom. Ballroom is the wrong word. Auditorium, sorry.
So just for clarity, would it not make things easier if 3A was entitled ballroom or auditorium edge? Would that not mean that you wouldn't need the asterisk part under the Fitzgerald Street edge below?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Cole. So, Councillor Topper, you're referring to B, changing to...
So just for clarity, further clarity, so Councillor Gontoshevsky was asking that if on the ground floor you have a ballroom, there's nil setback, but above it you can have a lesser setback. If you have an auditorium on the ground floor, you can have nil setback, and above it have a lesser setback. So I guess I'm asking, why is the asterisk section for where an auditorium proposed sitting under the Fitzgerald Street edge part as opposed to sitting under the ballroom edge part? Because it kind of makes the ballroom or the auditorium one and the same. So either titling A ballroom and or auditorium edge, or just having the asterisk section where an auditorium proposed sitting under the ballroom, that it would fall under the same provision rather than as an exception to the Fitzgerald Street edge, if that makes sense, given that an auditorium is not proposed.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I think the reason it's been set out that way is because the plan has a specific lines that denote what the ballroom edge is, what the Fitzgerald Street edge is, and so my view is that the asterisk belongs where it is for that reason.
Thank you. No, look, I accept your explanation of the specifics of the wording as to that it would only apply where an auditorium is proposed and would not apply beyond the extent of that auditorium. I think in light of the design review panel's commentaries that and one of the objectives in relation to having the building present as a series of smaller buildings, I think that actually having that differentiation around the ballroom and Fitzgerald Street is actually quite important, and my concern was that we would ultimately end up seeing a bulkier frontage to a large proportion of the Fitzgerald Street frontage. I am happier with this week than I was last week. I think that the changes that have come through after the briefing session and working through them, it has been somewhat challenging, but I think that it is an improved local development plan. I think that I probably still have some concerns in relation to whether the additional, I guess you could say concessions, or whether what's proposed in relation to some of the setbacks is going to be sufficient to ameliorate the impact of the additional proposed building height. I think that height has the potential to be quite impactful. However, I also think that my ultimate principle is that height is not necessarily a problem, it's placement within a site. So in that regards, I think that the design objectives will be critical in assessing any application or applications that come forward in this, and I guess just to completely satisfy myself, Director, could you just please just walk me through in terms of the Residential Design Codes Volume 2 around apartments, how they would be incorporated into assessment should an application come forward that is at or higher than the building heights proposed in this local development plan?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. As I tried to explain last week, it is the new R codes and the changes to the R codes create a very different assessment process to what we're used to, and so everything is now performance based. So the acceptable outcomes that are proposed in this LDP will only be one consideration as part of the assessment. So if an application comes in with the height that's shown as an acceptable outcome in this LDP, that height will be, the acceptable outcome will be one factor, but the overall objectives of Design WA, of the R codes, will be the main consideration. So that will be the most prominent consideration for the decision maker, for the DAP, and so even if that height is below or at that height, it will still be assessed against the relevant objectives, and if it doesn't meet that objective, then it ordinarily should be refused. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
It does, thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to confirm, since last Tuesday's briefing, that those changes to the ARC codes were gazetted last Friday, so they now have legal effect.
Who was seconding this one? Down, Councillor Loden. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Look, this is the first LDP I've dealt with on council, so it took me a while to get my head around how this worked, and I am satisfied with those additional amendments that have now subsequently been made. I guess the thing that will be really interesting with this is what will be the development that comes back to fit within this newly defined box. Obviously, if it completely fills the box, that's a problem. But to my understanding of the built form policy, the stuff that still has not been amended as part of this, that we have good controls in place to ensure that this is developed in a way that will be suitable for this lot. I'm interested to see what comes. Although I guess it won't come to us, it'll most likely go to the JDAP. So we'll see what happens there. But I'm supportive of the officer recommendation.
Councillors? Okay, just from me, the issue I think last week for me was about really getting that at-grade ground floor landscaping, and I'm happy with the additional acceptable outcomes that have been added under landscaping. I think that really makes it clear that we don't want to see landscaping just on the built form, but that trees with canopy and deep soil zones are critical. And I also am really pleased to see the requirement for the 80% ground floor canopy at the rear for the lot boundary setback. So that's satisfied a lot of the issues that I had last week. I don't think that additional height is an issue in this location. It is a very large site, and I think that the redevelopment will really add a lot to this area. So I really look forward to some high quality plans coming through, and I support the officer recommendation. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. The next item is 10.1, 2019 Greening Vincent Garden Awards. Can I have a mover and seconder? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Fotakis. Just to mention, we have two nominations, Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Harley, and I'm still looking for a third, if that would like to come forth during debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just, support the officer recommendation. I do have a proposed amendment, but I'll, in line with standing orders, will allow the seconder to speak if they wish. Otherwise, I'll proceed straight to the amendment.
Seconder, do you support the amendment, or do you wish to just second the motion first?
I just want to actually ask, do we actually have to finalise the three on the judging panel before we go to discussing any amendments?
No, we don't need to do it in that sequence, but you are, as the seconder, you can talk to the substantive motion, or you can choose to second the amendment. That's up to you.
Look, I'll second the amendment, but I'm not supportive of the amendment.
Okay. We're now addressing the amendment on the golden page, which has added a new clause 3. So is there any comments in relation to the amendment? Yes.
Thank you. So so what the amendment seeks to do, there's been some internal discussion. I've had discussions with the Director and the Manager of Parks and Gardens. We've had some interesting feedback. My understanding is that we struggle to get entries in some of the categories, and then the entries that we do get, we struggle to get ones that are worthy of necessarily being a part of the awards. And there are other categories which are very heavily supported. There's also two other issues with broadening. One is the budgetary issue, which is something that's relatively easily overcome. The other concern is that on the presentation night itself, that the presentation of the awards takes up a considerable amount of time, and the feedback I had from the Manager of Parks and Gardens is that most people are looking forward to the meal as much as they are watching people go up and shake hands and be given their prizes. So he was certainly of the view that adding categories would be a difficult thing. The principle of the amendment is to incorporate indoor gardens in some way, and the idea of trying to do it via email or via consensus seems to have failed in the last few days, which I respect and understand. So what this would do is, once the panel, the judging panel, which effectively forms a working party of sorts, once they are that is confirmed, they would be able to, I assume, convene a meeting early on and be able to find a way to include indoor gardens as part of the awards. I think the exclusion of them, I think, says more than the proposed inclusion does. I think that by including indoor gardens, it encourages people to green their indoor environments, and particularly whether we're talking about people who are living in apartments or, as I've suggested, even in the business environment. It puts greenery front and centre for people. I think it promotes healthy living and healthy working environment within Vincent. I think that there's a beauty element to it as well, and if we can recognise that in some way through the awards, I think to me it's fairly simple, and it also suggests to people that no matter where you are, you're able to include greenery and landscaping as a part of your immediate experience and surrounds, and that we would recognise and support that. So I actually see it as a great opportunity to promote the greening plan in general, but a greener Vincent. So I would seek people's support in that way.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
Well, I'm just looking through the categories, and always, whenever difficulty comes up with getting people to participate in anything, I always go back to maybe reassessing the marketing or the processes that were in place, and particularly when it comes to businesses. And we do have, and we often mention our town teams who have a wonderful link in with our businesses. I wonder whether in this instance we've utilised them as much as possible. For me, wrapping businesses with residences, I just don't get the right feel from that. Looking at apartments, it is an increasing demographic for us in Vincent. I live in an apartment myself. I've seen some of the magnificent gardens, and some of them have been past winners here in Vincent, and the effort that goes by residences with the creation of their green space and their landscaping in sometimes what is limited space. And for me to combine that with businesses and residences, when you've got different budget considerations and different intentions and different purposes that come between the two.
Fotakis, sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt you mid-flow there. I just wanted to point out that there was an earlier amendment that was put forward, but I think it has been changed, and the one that is before us is a new clause 3 that requests the judging panel to include an appropriate category or subcategory to recognise indoor gardens as part of the awards. This inclusion is to be clearly articulated in the call for nominations. So it's just wanted to make sure and clarify that's the one that you're working from, because there was an earlier iteration.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for the clarification, because I'm going by the earlier amendment. Thank you, Mayor.
It was a little bit confusing because there are a number of amendments flying around, and I can understand why there was that confusion. Thank you. This was changed a few times. Yep. Do you still wish to speak to the amendment that's before? Any comments on that one?
No further comments, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Councillor Loden.
Just a clarification, it may be through to the mover or to administration. So this would potentially create an additional category, or it would become a subcategory under one of the existing categories, and if so, which one?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I can help. We've had a little bit of time to consider the amendment, and the simple way that we could handle it, I mean, subject to the judging panel agreeing, is that we could add indoor gardens to best courtyard and balcony, so there's no reason why we couldn't add indoor to that. I think it probably fits nicely, and that's residential gardens. And in the business garden, we could be clear that that would include indoor gardens as well. And we do struggle for businesses to, we struggle to get businesses to enter, so we could expand traditionally that looks at outdoor gardens, but we could include indoor gardens in that. So that could be a simple way to deal with the amendment.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the amendment within the context that it's just expanding the existing category, not creating a whole new category would be my preference, but obviously that's down to the judging panel.
Are you volunteering? Any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Gonchevsky.
I'll leave it to the judging panel, but I will just make my views known. I believe I'm in alignment with Councillor Fotakis in that, as having been a judge twice in the garden competition, seeing the apartments that have been developed with on-premise planting is well, it's fantastic. There's some great gardens out there on newly developed properties, and but I also do love indoor gardens. So I would love to see an indoor garden category or subcategory, but would hope that we can keep our promotion of really great new built form and apartments that are, and people that are, doing courtyards and balcony gardens as their residential as a separate category. That's just my 2 cents.
Councillors? Look, I agree pretty much with what Councillor Gonchevsky just said. I think that sometimes the balcony gardens are the most surprising and awe-inspiring because it's incredible to see what you can achieve on a balcony. But we do have a lot of new businesses in Vincent selling indoor plants. I really love this idea because it's very trendy and in vogue to be having your indoor plants, and we've got these great emerging businesses, and I think it's, we don't have a lot of space in Vincent for huge plant nurseries, but we've got at least 4 new relatively recent businesses selling indoor plants in Vincent, and I think this ties in really nicely and covers a sort of emerging area, so I support the amendment. Any further comment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. While we're at the amendment, no, we're just dealing with clause 3. Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Thank you. We're back to the substantive, so I'll just go to clause 2. We have approves a final judging panel, including Councillor Harley, Councillor Fotakis, and Councillor. One more nomination.
Through you, Mecca. I'm happy to do it again. I feel like...
Thank you, Councillor Castle. We have a third councillor.
I didn't want to take the joy away from one of my fellow councillors, but okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Castle. It's wonderful news. Okay, any further comments? No, we'll put the motion. All those in favour? Oh.
That's the amendment to clause 2, because I still have a question.
No, we're back at the substantive.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Just for clarity, the allocation of prizes where it's a voucher pack and there's a dollar figure allocated to it. So I don't know, I think it's a question for, I assume it's a question for the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. The allocation of vouchers, does that mean that the city has had money donated and we will go into a business premise and offer them dollar for dollar? So if there is a $500 prize from a business, that's because the city has paid a local business $500? Or is there either the intent or opportunity to go to a local business and say, we have $500 allocated to us, are you prepared to provide a voucher of 501, 5,000? Is the intent that it's dollar for dollar and we're actually buying the prizes as vouchers, or that we are seeking sponsorship potentially from businesses with a cash component to assist alongside it?
Through my call, I'll answer the question as best I can. My understanding is that we purchase the vouchers, so if it's $500, we purchase $500 worth of vouchers. However, and there was a question last week which still remains unanswered on the briefing notes, I've discussed this with a manager of marketing, and they are very open to the idea of sponsorship, whether it's a 50-50 or... So we're definitely open to that opportunity.
Just in that, I think that we just then need to also be careful about the promotion of businesses. So somebody, for instance, who is offering a $500 prize and has perhaps been paid $250 to offer it, receiving the same promotion as somebody who's been paid $500 to offer a $500 prize. I think we should be careful about identifying sponsors as opposed to recipients of city money in order to provide prizes. Just that I think that if we are going to be encouraging people to participate in that way, I think that we just need to be careful of it, that's all.
Good point. Any further comments? Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, can I just make a comment on that? I'm not sure if there are other reasons for going down this road with vouchers. My understanding was it was a way to support local businesses, and I have some reservations about doing that by seeking their sponsorship as opposed to paying for their vouchers and their wares. The other thing I would flag is that we may need to be very careful between any crossover and conflict between those offering vouchers and those potentially entering awards. So indoor plants businesses might be the perfect place to offer a voucher from, but that might preclude them from entering. So we just need to be careful about how we approach that.
Thank you very much to our garden competition committee member. I think you can definitely explore those. No, they're very good issues to discuss and be clear on before this is embarked on. I think that would be great for the council members involved to pursue that conversation. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Next item is 11.10, adoption of council election period policy. Can I have a mover? Moved Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Gonchevsky.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'm happy to see the changes that have been made to this policy. We've been through a couple of iterations of it in the last few weeks. There's one clause that I do have a question about and potential amendment. Apologies for doing it on the fly. It's clause 5.5.1 in relation to City of Vincent website and digital media. It says during the election period the city's website and digital media will not contain any material which is precluded by this policy. Any references to the election will only relate to the election process. I'm fine with that bit. The second part says information about elected members who are candidates will be restricted to names, contact details, titles, membership of committees, working and advisory groups to which they've been appointed to by council. There was some discussion about this last week. My question is, well, I guess it's a question. If we were to remove that final sentence, would that achieve the outcome of simply leaving what is currently there for the period of the election period, so as not to actually remove information, personal information that's available about elected members now?
Through you, Mayor Cole, for the purposes of the policy, which is general guidance to guide administration during this period, I don't have a problem with us deleting that for the draft that goes out for advertising, so we can delete that subject to council's endorsement.
On that basis, if I have a seconder, I'd like to propose an amendment to delete that line.
So just to clarify, Councillor Castle, you're talking about from information about elected members. Yep, okay. Is there a seconder for this? Thank you, Councillor Fotakis.
I don't think I need to add more than I've said, other than to clarify that it's in order to not require the removal of current information from the website about elected members.
Councillor Fotakis.
Makes sense.
Councillors, any further comments on the amendment? I'll support the amendment. I do think that it does go to that issue of council members continuing to fulfil their roles while it is an election period, and council members who are up for election should not then be changing content to reflect electioneering statements. I think if it's the bio that is online to reflect them in their role. They do continue to hold that role through to the election, so provided it's not used for electioneering purposes, which is the purpose of this policy, then I'll support the amendment. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments on the policy? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the policy carried.
Just checking that the minute taker's got that with Tash. Is that okay? Yep. Okay.
Okay. Next item is 11.11, Draft Safer Vincent Plan 2019 to 2022. Can I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Fatakis, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. The Safer Vincent Plan is the city's fourth community safety and crime prevention plan, and from feedback from our Imagine Vincent community engagement initiative, it was really valuable in helping inform the plan. And out of the 4,000 plus ideas and thoughts that were captured, those elements that directly related to community safety and crime prevention were extracted, and we're now seeking community feedback on the draft plan. So we've had a strong history of collaborating with other groups like WA Police and outreach services, and we've received their input as well as community members through the Safer Vincent Advisory Group. I think we know what we're good at and what our limitations are, and where it's important for us to work with and get help from others. And I think in many respects this plan, compared to previous plans, really helps to identify that a lot more than what previous plans have done. So there's three themes underpinning the actions and deliverables. Safe spaces, and I think a lot of that discussion of our places being safe, vibrant, welcoming is a real integral part of Vincent's appeal and what makes our ongoing prosperity, particularly when it comes to our town centres. Secondly, community connections, and we talk a lot about being a connected community and the importance of our village neighbourhood appeal, and our social networks, neighbours looking out for each other, activating our public spaces, and ensuring people feel safe in those places. And thirdly, crime prevention, where the approach is very much more one of collaborating with stakeholders like WA Police that I mentioned before. The city has a number of other plans, and I think when we look at all the work that's being done and important actions and deliverables within those plans that also link to this draft Safer Vincent Plan, the integrated transport plan, which is in development and will help address transport safety and mobility issues. The Arts Development Plan, which has a component addressing graffiti, and our town centre plans, which address safety in our town centres. So I'm really happy that the plan has got to this stage, and congratulations to all the staff that have worked on it. We do have an amendment on the table, but I'll allow my seconder to actually speak to the motion.
Seconders happy not to speak. Would anyone else? You're moving the amendment? No pressure. We can continue with the debate if not.
Thank you, Mayor. It's the amendment that's come through from Mayor Cole on the pink. I think in looking through this, great to have the feedback of everyone. I think the amendments on the pink add a lot more clarity to the plan. The inclusion of additional crime statistics are really important, and I know that Councillor Gontaszewski is going to enjoy having more data. It's one of the loves of my fellow councillor that I can't disagree with adding more data to the plan. clarifying the roles of rangers and WA Police in the community. I think that, again, is just that extra tier in really being able to add more value to the plan, and the reference to the Love the Laneway demonstration project and the note of relocation of our rangers to the proposed Vincent Community Hub in Leederville. Great additions, and I think an additional to what I referenced before about how we have these additional layers coming through from other plans. There's so much going on that will further enhance what we're doing in other areas, and particularly the rangers, the relocation, and enhancing our eyes on the street. So that's the amendment.
Councillor Gontaszewski, do you wish to speak to the amendment? No? Any comments? Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. You've outlined it all very well. I did just want to go to the issue of the security patrols, because I think that the reason why I've just sought to add a bit more clarity around this is because I do think we need to be quite upfront with the community that security patrol services based on experiences of other councils are very costly, and we need to also sort of talk about what the role of rangers can do. And it was also about including in the Safety of Vincent plan the intention that we have under the draft budget to bring rangers back into the heart of Vincent in Leederville, so that eyes on the street presence will increase by virtue of bringing our ranger services back into Vincent and being able to spend their shifts entirely within Vincent and cut journey times, and being based out at the depot in Osborne Park. So just because, in terms of attending safety forums over time with community members, we have had questions asked, and we did have the issue of security patrol services come up through community consultation like Imagine Vincent, and previously the Director of Community and Business has provided information around the fact that a lot of other local governments that offer this service do impose a levy. So because it is a service which is often quite expensive, for example in Stirling, I know it's a much greater council, but they have a $2.9 million cost for the service and a $30 levy, whereas the City of Swan has a $150 levy for their residents living in the Vines and $100 per ratepayer in Ellenbrook. So just those, there are other examples as well, but not to kind of bang on about it too much. I think that we just need to sort of articulate to community role of rangers, what a security patrol service can do, and that it is usually a additional cost to ratepayers for those councils who have gone down that path, so that it didn't appear that we were making commitments without really being a bit more upfront about what that might require from residents in return. So I think it's a bit more, what are the words? I'm losing words. Articulated, perhaps, or go with that. That'll do. Okay, so I won't speak any further. Thank you. I have run out of words. Yep. Okay, does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll put it all those in favour. Declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the substantive. All those in favour. Declare it carried unanimously. Thank you. We are down to our final item for the evening, and that is 12.1, the Draft Sustainable Environment Strategy. Moved by Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This has been a bit of a journey, the Sustainable Environment Strategy. I think first came to this Environmental Advisory Group back in 2016 for discussion, and I've gone around many loops in that process. Had lots of engagement within that group and discussions. It also came through the Strategic Community Plan, and a lot of feedback came in through that process as well. Overall, I'm broadly supportive of this plan, of the strategy, with one amendment, obviously, which I'll talk to separately. It gives a good guidance around the key areas of where we have an environmental footprint. around our stationary energy, our transport energy, our waste, our water, and our urban greening and biodiversity. In many ways, a lot of this, the detail under this has already been previously drafted up because we already have an existing greening plan which has recently been adopted by Council that gives good direction and clarity around what we want to achieve. Similarly, we have our waste strategy, which also has that same level of clarity and detail in it that we are seeing as we are progressively working through those items as well. The key opportunities, I guess, I saw within the Sustainable Environment Strategy were around what we were going to do around water, what we were going to do around stationary energy, and what we were going to do around transport energy. Overall, the plan provides clear targets and goals around where the city wants to be. I guess one of the challenging parts is around water, with that goal around a water-sensitive city. This is a relatively new framework that the Water Corp has developed. I think at the time I was strongly pushing to see some inclusion around clear goals around grey water and wastewater recycling. We do a fantastic job of eco-zoning in the city, but there is a physical limit on how much you can eco-zone before you actually run out of. You do need green spaces that do need irrigation, and currently we're using potable water for that. The water-sensitive city framework is a bit vague for my likes, but in many ways how we manage water is a bit beyond our control as well. We are very reliant on what the Water Corp wants to do. They've set this as their direction and set a number of targets around what you need to achieve to get to the various phases of that water-sensitive city process. The city has progressed with that, relatively well progressed, and will continue to progress with that, which is great to see. I'll be interested to see what the physical changes are that will happen on the ground as a result of this, because it still feels a little bit vague to me, but I'm happy to let that process evolve. Our transport energy, that represents about 9% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. We have a clear target around the light fleet, which is a fairly small percentage of that total. The big challenge is the heavy fleet. We do have some potential funds on budget next year to investigate an electric heavy vehicle garbage truck. So it'll be interesting to see where that comes out in the next year. But the future is here. There is at least one electric garbage truck in Australia, and I think that's something that will has the potential to move forward quite quickly, and the city to be in a position to capitalise on that as well. It's good to see that assessment as part of this program. Under stationary energy, I guess one of the things we do have is the Switch Your Thinking program. We were promised an update on the uptake of Switch Your Thinking prior to the council meeting by the sustainability officer, but I didn't see that come through. I just wanted to check if the administration had an update on that by any chance.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm checking the briefing notes, but if it's not in there, then I apologise, we haven't provided that.
That's all right. I have my suspicions that the uptake of Switch Your Thinking is relatively low. The program does offer a 15% discount to City of Vincent residents for the installation of solar panels, which is not an insignificant discount that people can achieve. But part of this plan will talk to how we can actually more promote that better with our community as well. Currently it's posted on the website, and we have some information at our greening events, but to actually be a bit more proactive about how we engage with that, with our eco signs and so forth that we have around the city, to get it a bit more in front of people's faces, to see that, hope that they then see the opportunity that avails to us. There is information around there around advocating for peer-to-peer trading. One of the issues we have at the city at the moment is we are in the process of installing a lot of solar panels, including on this very building here. The panels will provide a substantial amount of our energy during the working week, but being very energy efficient that we are on the weekends when there's nobody in the office, we actually turn everything off and produce surplus power. Currently, under regulations, we aren't able to sell that and basically provide that free back into the grid. With a peer-to-peer trading system in place, for example, we would be able to sell that to local residents and also be able to sell it at a discount to what they're currently paying. So there's a clear win-win opportunity there as well. Another initiative is the staff training, particularly in our development services team, to help them be at the forefront of these issues as development applications come through, so we can help to try and influence and improve the quality of the designs that come through. Some of that work is already done, but this is a mechanism by which we can make sure that training is more uniform, the staff are better informed, and we can hopefully see even better outcomes with the built form as it comes through. Another inclusion is as our rolling assessment of solar panels goes on, to include battery storage, which, although is a less economic opportunity than just straight solar panels, does have a payback period of about 12 years and does have the potential to have a positive business case for the city. Particularly would be advantageous for the places where we have power consumption in the evening through lighting, and could make use of solar panels in that location to then run those off batteries overnight. Those loads are very well established and quite fixed, so you could design a system to fit that ideally. It would be great for our reserves, but also for some of our public facilities that the community access as well. That's all I wanted to say on that. But I want to say that I do support, subject to an amendment, the Sustainable Environment Strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roden. Councillor Hallett.
Just a couple of things after that from Councillor Loden. Firstly, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Anita Marriott, who's the officer involved in what it was an enormous body of work, and I think we should be really excited at bringing this finally to the community. The comprehensive nature of a lot of the work that's in here, that in part can package up some of the stuff that we're already doing as a council that seeks to implement a lot of sustainability measures, but certainly being ambitious and trying to go forward into the future to stay a leader in WA around sustainability. I also want to thank the Environment Advisory Group, because I've been extensively involved over the process and have had a lot to contribute to this. I'll leave that there.
Councillors. Councillor Loden.
I would like to move the amendment on the yellow, which is to just add, subject to administration amending the target for net zero greenhouse gas emissions and net zero greenhouse gas emissions for stationary energy to 2030, noting that it currently reads 2050.
Seconder for the amendment. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try and be concise. I guess the starting point for our target of 2050 comes from the IPCC, which they define as the appropriate deadline to achieve zero greenhouse gas emissions. The City of Vincent is small compared to state and federal governments. State and federal governments have to deal with issues like existing oil and gas facilities that have 40-year plus timeframes, and mining facilities, existing power plants that have 20-plus year timeframes, methane produced by cows and sheep, which is probably one of the most intractable challenges of all, although I recognise a couple of our councillors do have a very clear solution to that problem, being the vegans on our council. So those are the really hard parts around addressing greenhouse gas emissions. And I guess what I'm saying here is that we should be doing the bits that are easier sooner. The question is, how much sooner should we be doing that? I did a bit of benchmarking of what other councils have done across Australia, and this isn't obviously the entirety of all local governments in Australia, but 23 local governments have targets for net zero emissions. Those targets range between 2009, so obviously already existing, through to 2030, with the exception being the City of Perth, which doesn't have a zero target, and Bendigo, which has a target of 2036. These councils range in size, but predominantly the councils on the East Coast are larger than the City of Vincent. They will have a larger footprint, but then they also similarly have larger resources to throw at it. It is worth noting that outside of WA, all the major capital cities have targets for net zero greenhouse gas emissions of 2020. One exception being the City of Sydney, which does have a carbon neutral position, and they have been doing that for a number of years as well. So if you're looking at it from a benchmarking perspective, 2030 would be actually at the tail end of when most local governments have been putting this target in place for. But I do recognise that just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean that you also have to do it as well. I think my mum said something like that to me at one point in time. Thanks, Mum. I guess the second question then is, can we practically achieve this in the time frame? So we have 10 and a half years before it's 2030. The 3 points of emission sources that we have are waste emissions. We have a target of zero waste to landfill by 2028. One of the big ways we're going to achieve that is by diverting our organics that are decomposing through a composting system or otherwise would achieve about a 90% reduction in what our current emissions are that occur from landfill. So the waste emissions, which are about 23% of our emissions, will reduce to about 2% of that current total. Our transport emissions will rely on the ability to transition to a zero tailpipe emissions solution around heavy vehicles. But I do note the strategy does define the low emissions objective for those vehicles if that solution is not in place. The reality is we turn over our fleet every 6 years, so if by 2024, which is 5 years from now, there is commercially viable electric vehicles that would fit for the city, by 2030 we will have zero tailpipe emissions from our heavy fleet as well as our light fleet. That then shifts those emissions to our stationary energy, and that is the real challenge for us, is how do we deal with our stationary emissions. The SES refers to 6,400 megawatts per year of energy that we consume. If we assume that there isn't going to be any energy efficiency gains over that period of time, the city would need to, as an example, install roughly 4,300 kilowatts of solar panels over the next 11 years. I do this as an illustration of how this could be achieved just purely by the installation of infrastructure. This does cover an area of 43,000 square metres, which is an area of 207 metres by 207 metres. You can tell I'm an engineer. Similar areas in the city would be the Beatty Park area, the Loftus Car Park Administration Building, Leederville Childcare Centre next door, and the Loftus Centre. That sits at 47,000 square metres. The Leederville Oval, which is just over again next door, is at 46,000 square metres. Frame Court Car Park, Leederville Parade Car Park and the Loftus Car Park, which is 37,000 square metres. Now, obviously you wouldn't cover any of these areas in their entirety with solar panels, but it does give you an idea of the scale of space that we would need. The area of land equates to roughly 1% of what the city currently owns, which, as a comparison, the greening plan talks to a 20% tree canopy coverage target by 2050. We won't practically do this and go and install 430 kilowatts of solar panels every year. There are many other mechanisms we can use to achieve that, but solar panels is one mechanism we can do that. Particularly peer-to-peer trading will be a way we can achieve this by either purchasing power off other providers or even our own residents. And I note that with the shifts that are in place with stuff like peer-to-peer trading and solar with battery backup systems, it'll debottleneck a lot of what we're currently restricted to with just purely a solar PV system, because we are then able to shift our energy around and store it and access it from other people. At the end of the day, when we get to 2030, there will be some residual emissions in place, which we'll then need to give consideration to through some form of offsets. But I would suggest that a consideration of an offsets policy would be something that could be considered in the next SES, which would, I assume, based on this time frame, be from 2024 to 2029. So nicely in time to meet the 2030 target. Yeah, that's it. So ask for your support. Thank you.
Councillor Gonczewski.
Just a point of clarification, possibly a bit basic, but just in the text in the document talks about energy in city operations and the community, but I think really where we're looking at is city operations. Is the amended target confirmed that it's net zero greenhouse gas emissions and net zero greenhouse gas emissions for stationary energy from city operations only, or beyond?
My intent is for it to only be for city operations, because my understanding of the target was that it was city operations, not for the whole community. Because we can't mandate that too. We can't control that.
I think that one of the, just with the rationale around some of the differences between levels of government in terms of the type of businesses that may operate and report to, etc., I just wanted to make sure we were clear that what we're really just talking about here is elements that are under the city's control. I feel inclined to support this, but possibly just because I think that it's good to have accept some of the rationale coming forward. I do believe this is a radically changing space where technologies and the affordability of such technologies is changing. I think that this is signalling. And again, if the strategy is for 5 years and the targets are beyond, there is ultimate review points, and where if the technology and the environment hasn't changed at the same pace that was expected, or there are regulatory or economic factors that would preclude a target from being met, or that city priorities have changed, that essentially that is likely to come about in subsequent strategies. However, I think that this timeline is, is possibly ambitious, and I guess I would be grateful for some administration comments in relation to their views on the proposed amendment, but also in terms of offsets. Whilst I accept Councillor Loden's commentary that offsets would not need to be dealt with in the short term, I'm not particularly familiar with the offset purchasing, and I'd just be interested in some additional advice around what the cost of offsets are currently, and where we might, what sort of financial investment, not that this would necessarily be committing us to anything, but what anything that this could potentially trigger. I wouldn't want to be putting my hand in the air for something that was essentially seen to be committing or indicating that we were going to be expending a significant portion of city funds on this, when we have buildings and there's a lot of pressure on city funds, there's a lot of investment, and we have open space where we need to spend our money that has community benefit. Yes, we haven't heard from administration, so I would be grateful for their commentary on this.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we don't disagree with anything that's been said and the rationale and justification that's been put forward for the proposed amendment. It does essentially relate to the level of ambition and how quickly we reach that target. We're certainly moving in the right direction with all the actions that have been outlined in the strategy. In response to Councillor Gondaszewski's question, it essentially comes down to how quickly, if there's a gap between our operations and carbon neutrality, how quickly we want to start purchasing offsets for any gap. The actions outlined in the strategy will get that gap to be quite narrow by the time we hit 2029, 2030. It's impossible for us to predict the evolution of international and national carbon trading mechanisms. They'll continue to become more sophisticated, and we'll get a much better understanding about the price point in which we would enter into purchasing offsets as well. Our suggestion in response to the proposed amendment is essentially because the target would be outside the lifespan of the strategy, is that before the end of this strategy in the next 5 years, that we would develop a policy on offsets, purchasing of offsets for council's consideration, and then that would essentially be able to give us some better estimates than what we've included in the amended report, which could then be factored into the long-term financial plan and the annual budgeting process for when the city may start purchasing offsets for any gap in our overall emissions.
Thank you. Just a more
Councillor Gontaszewski, have you finished? Yes, Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a follow-up question through you, Madam Mayor. If the amendment is successful, and I think perhaps it's a question for the CEO, if the amendment is successful, given that it deals with a target that is outside the life of, as you said, the life of the strategy, what material changes would the city view would be the result of the amendment? I have an understanding of what may come from the chamber floor, but from an administrative point of view, or the actions that are there, what would the administration perceive to be the material changes that a shorter term target would result in, specifically for the strategy and the areas outlined within the strategy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the strategy and the actions are premised on direct action and doing everything we can. Many of the items that Councillor Loden outlined about doing things which reduce our emissions but also save us money in the long term, and solar is the best and most obvious example, and one we've just started commencing and rolling out, where we wouldn't propose to make any changes to the specific actions in the strategy, because we're heading in very quickly in the right direction to reduce our carbon footprint. The only addition would be that it would bring forward our thinking and development of a policy over the next few years for Council to consider about possible purchasing of offsets. We would track very, very quickly, or very, very closely, the rollout of electric rubbish trucks, looking at the Director of Infrastructure and Environment as well, and we just want to make sure that any decisions we made about operations wouldn't impact on our ability to provide the current level of service to residents and ratepayers when we start making some of those step changes to the technology we're currently employing for our day-to-day operations. And through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify Councillor Gontaszewski's question, there's the reference to this target is on page 8, and it's an overarching statement under 3 sentences, which just does relate specifically to city operations. And as Councillor Loden mentioned, we are essentially a small local government without any major emitting sources over and above the normal business that we conduct as a local government. Thank you.
Thank you. Further question that's obliquely related to the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. The emissions, or the time on the road for our rubbish trucks, and the I suppose the heavy usage of fuel, is it mostly related to the time it spends within the city or the time it spends on the freeway going to and from? So in a cycle of pickup, given what's involved in lifting and otherwise, would it be possible to estimate or guesstimate whether the greatest deal of usage of or burning of diesel occurs in the pickup round, or actually driving the trucks up to Marla Park and back?
Through Mayor Cole, I'm not sure we've ever quite looked at it that way, so I couldn't tell you the split. But what I can say is that when it's idling around the city, doing hardly any kilometres, but the engine's running, that's the most inefficient period, which is different to when it's running to Marla Park. But I'm not sure that we've ever looked at the to say, oh well, 20% of fuel is used doing this, and so we've not mapped it that way. But it is an efficient crawling around the around the city.
Councillors, Councillor Murphy.
Look, I think I support this. I kind of was reading this article today around Mexico, and they have a policy where you can pay your tax in artwork. I thought, How interesting. Well, why not pay your tax in solar energy or pay your rate? So, I think being ambitious is obviously, there's a lot of concern and urgency out there in the community, and I think why not be ambitious and have a crack? So, yeah, I actually support this. Thanks for all your work on that too.
Councillors?
Thanks. Yeah, I do support it as well. I think there's been a lot of talk about this as kind of the final decade for getting emissions under control. Obviously, we're a very small player in all of this, but I think it absolutely it's a strong statement of where we should, and all other local governments and obviously our higher level government should well and truly be heading.
Councillors? Look, I'm remaining open-minded, but I do have a couple of questions. Just to you, Councillor Loden, in relation to the 23 local governments that have the 2030, 2034 or lesser, are they all reliant on purchasing offsets? Is that something that your research went to?
I haven't gone and delved into the detail of every individual one. A large number of them have. So, for example, Sydney's strategy is back. I think it was in 2015. They committed to offsets, and they would offset all their emissions. But at the same time, they've got a program of investment to bring those emissions down at the same time. So, I guess it's not dissimilar to what is proposed here. It's just instead of us purchasing offsets for the next 10 years until we get to where we need to be, we're holding on to those funds. That should give us more money available to actually invest into these sort of activities as well, and public open space and maintaining our buildings and all that other sort of stuff. But I think in the vast majority of cases, I would assume that they are at some point going to have to rely on offsets, because you've got really intractable things like waste where you can get it to a certain point in time, but unless you're going to do biochar of your organic matter and some very highly complex processes, you're going to have some residual emissions there as well. I guess the intent there is to drive it as low as practicable, and then 10 years is a good length of time to be able to figure out what those investments need to be and get them in place based on the technology we have available today. And then you'll get to a point where practically we can't get any further. There's a decision point around offsets there, obviously. Obviously my preference would be that we did offset it.
Okay, I was asking you a question, not for more commentary, but thank you. The other question I did have for you is that you talked about the kilowatt requirements, so if we went down, because I understand that stationary energy is the critical issue, and that you talked about 4,300 kilowatts, and I just went back to check on our current project, which is 258 kilowatts in total, so I thought that's like 16 times the program that we're running. So just in terms of any thoughts on how we could bring down the stationary energy, because I mean that's still, if we did that 16 times over 10.5 years, that level of investment, if it was just solar panels, and I know the solar panel technology really has not shifted in a very long time and really does need to change, but any further ideas on stationary energy reduction, because that seems just, based on current solar panel technology and what we've just paid for and are rolling out, that's a significant increase on that project, 258 to 4,300.
So I guess so it's 285 you said, wasn't it?
258.
258. So if you roll that over a 10-year period, that would be 430 kilowatts a year. So you'd have to basically do this level of infrastructure. Well, was that 60% larger than what we've just done this year, and then that would need to happen every year to achieve it. There is technology around wind turbines. Those technologies are improving. I don't know the wind speeds here in the city, if there are any places that are prospective. The benchmark, it used to be 8 metres per second, but it has dropped to 7, and there are some small-scale micro wind turbines that are able to do at 6 metres a second, which vastly increases the locations where you can do that, but I don't know what that wind speed is around here. That's probably the only other option from a renewable energy point of view, outside of things like biodiesel and so forth. But those are alternative strategies around your transport emissions instead. So, yeah.
Thank you. And then I have 2 questions for administration. So, does the strategy set the pathway and actions necessary to actually reach a target by 2030? And would that then be dependent on offset purchasing? So that's a 2-part question.
Mayor Cole, there will still be a gap by 2030 between our predicted current emissions and zero emissions. We can't predict exactly what that would be, but we can't foresee a situation where we would be zero unless we actually had a lot of additional solar which was feeding in and offsetting our current energy use through electricity usage and the waste measures which Councillor Lurden mentioned.
I'd really like to be ambitious and go for the target, but I'm just when you look at the kilowatts we're getting from the solar panels and the cost versus what would be needed if it was solar panel was a solution, and the fact that administration can't cost the gap, it's causing me hesitancy. I'd love to go, I don't know, I'm feeling, I just feel like if we're going to make a target, I'd really like to be able to say to the community that this is how, even with the waste strategy target, I've sort of done some thinking around, did we actually need to have a conversation with the community about waste from energy, because is that ultimately going to have to be part of that target? And I have some concern that we did not maybe do that. So I just feel like in making targets, I personally would like to be able to explain what this strategy says in terms of how we get there, and if the discussion is then that there's a gap, an idea, I know it's hard with emerging technology and over a long time, but what that gap might be and might cost, because I can't see us rolling out a higher order of solar panels every year for the next 10 years. That's just, in terms of all of the cost, all of the funding things that we need to confront in terms of, I'm going back to the buildings and the open space, but I would really love to set an ambitious target at the same time, so it's really hard. Would anyone else like to enter the debate? Councillor, do you have a question?
Am I correct in thinking that if a solar proposal can demonstrate a positive business case, then the city would actually be able to borrow the funds to make that investment and then pay for it back out of the energy savings, and therefore not create a choice between buildings and public open space and investment in solar?
I'll just get the CEO to answer where we are with our borrowings.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't have the number in front of me, but we are relatively close to our current borrowing limit, and I think the experience was once we went out for tender for the solar panels that the cost did come under what we had estimated for that as a result of that competitive tendering process. But the initial budget estimate for that total amount would have pushed us essentially very close to the line of what our borrowing limit is, given our other obligations.
And do we have a milestone payment that we need to make in the not too distant future, which would then create substantial space in borrowing capacity?
Yeah. Through you, Mayor Cole, there is a large, what we call a balloon payment for our debt that we entered into for the adjoining building, which is leased to the Department of Sport and Recreation. I would have to take on notice and come back to Council on what that implication is for the following financial year, not next financial year, but the year after that.
Someone had their hand up. Councillor Fotakis.
I'm like you, Mayor. I looked at this and I love ambitious targets because I think they do cause us to really lift our game and to look at ways to achieve it. But where my concerns are is in meeting that target, are we committing future councils to possible debts and costs that haven't been factored in? So I mean, that's where I'm sitting. I would love to support it, but my hesitancy really comes back from learning from past decisions that were made and decisions that we're now incurring the impact of. I don't want to get to 2030 and then be in a position where we're having to scramble for additional cost in order to meet that. I'm quite happy to support a 2040, which I noticed that the city staff were also happy to support as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to comment that there would be no obligation on council other than the public and reputation aspect to committing to that target if the actions weren't put in place to reach that target. So having that target in a document like this doesn't compel council to follow up to meet those targets. It's more such a long-term targets, a signal of intent and a signal that we're working in that direction, as opposed to locking council into future budget decisions which have to be part of the annual budget decision-making process.
Can I just ask a question? Given that this is for advertising, if council, would that, and then when it comes back to advertising, would additional time for administration to sort of consider what other local governments have done to achieve these targets, would that provide some assistance in actually stepping through in terms of order of magnitude of expense of, say, going to purchase solar and what offsets might cost to achieve the target? Would that time frame help, or is it the fact that it's more about not being able to be sure because of emerging technologies and changes over the length of the period of the target?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it is a long-term target. 20, given the nature of the industry, renewable energy, the changing shape of energy, battery power and storage. It'd be very difficult for us to predict what sort of world we're living in 2030, particularly as it goes to energy for commercial buildings, and that's advancing rapidly as well, but particularly the evolving technology around battery storage. So we'd be starting to speculate about where we may be in 10 years' time.
So then the advice would pretty much be consistent with what's already on the page. Okay, that's good. Yep. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Sorry, I'm being vague again. Just to clarify that the estimates on page... no, that's not working. 526. Oh, no, 526. Oh, maybe I'm on the old one. In relation to the estimated emissions for 2930, the table. Maybe on the wrong page. 528 of the actual document, 526 of my Docs on Tap document. That's on the basis of the estimated emissions are on the basis of the works that are proposed within the current strategy, not as opposed to any additional works. And so that the estimated cost of offset at a basis of $8 a tonne would be $34,500 per year on the basis of the works that we're currently proposed to do within the life of this strategy and beyond. Okay, thanks.
Councillors, so just to clarify that question then, so if we did what was in the plan, by 2029, 2030, the offsets would cost $17,282. Is that right?
Depending on the price that we're paying for it. It could be 8. We've done a range between 4 and 8.
Oh, so the range, so there's a range from 34 to 17,000. Okay. So not crazy, no. But that's quite convincing. Okay. Okay, any further comments on the amendment? Councillor Vatakis?
I've just got a question on those calculations. Does that take into account projected growth of our city? And I would presume with growth of our residents comes growth of the administration.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that is predicated on our current operations and growth for a changing population.
Councillors, are we ready to put the amendment? Anyone wish to speak that hasn't? Okay. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just to note, the officer's comment in response to the amendment was that whilst the strategy calls for 2050, that they were comfortable with 2040. So there's 2030 on the table, but whilst we're dealing in long-term absolutes, there's a 50-50 option sitting in there that the city administration said they would support.
Okay, I'm going to put the amendment unless there's any further comments or questions. All those in favour? Oh, wow. Go, Councillor Loden. You convinced us. Well done. Unanimously supported by this council. Very good. Okay, we're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? Look, I know it's getting on and you've heard enough from me, but I just do want to say this is a really high quality document. It's incredibly thorough. It is long and lengthy, and at first I thought that was a problem, but then when you actually go to the content, it's actually really something that we should be extremely proud of. So I just want to say a huge thank you to the EAG, to our councillors Loden and Hallett who sit on the EAG, and to Anita Marriott, our officer, who put so much time and care into the preparation of this document, and it is really well done. That's it. So I'll put it, all those in favour, I declare it carried. So that means that the meeting has come to an end at 9:06 p.m. Thank you.